Good morning, everybody. As we go to the Chitas of today, we're holding in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. We're holding on chapter 32, verse number 20 today. Wednesday, we're in the fourth part. We're going to go into Matis Maseh. We're going to go into the portion of Maseh, the last portion in that book, the fourth book. Moshe Rabbeinu said, if you do this thing in Techolzu, Lefnei Hashem, if you will go out, you arm yourself before God. You go out before God to the war. Verse 20, and all your armored men will cross the Jordan before God, until that he will inherit the land. The fana before him. And the land will be captured before God. And after that, you shall return. Then you'll be free. You will be clean, so to say, between God and the Jewish people. And this land will be for you as an inheritance before God. Verse 23, if you're not going to do this, then you'll know that you have sinned to God. You should know your sins. Which will catch up to you, which will be verse 24. Build yourself cities. To your children. And build yourself pens for your animals. Whatever came out of your mouth, you shall do. Ashi says, it's a grammar, the root is tzaina, which is a sheep enclosure. Hayetzim pichan tasu, to the Eibishter, whatever you say you should do, because you made a promise to God. That which you accept upon yourself to cross over for battle and remain until the conquest and the division of the land is complete. For Moshe Rabbeinu, I only asked of them, and the land will be conquered. Afterwards you may return. Yet they undertook to stay there until they took possession. So they added, because really Moshe Rabbeinu said to go out to war. That took 7 years. But they added that they're going to stay there until that the land was divided, which took another 7 years. So they added upon themselves 7 years, extra 7 years, was ultimately 14 years. Thus, they added a promise to remain for 7 years that it was divided. So they didn't go home for 14 years. Verse 25, our servants will do which the master commands. Now she says, they all settled like one man. All our children, our wives, and our livestock, and all our cattle remain there in the city of Gilad. And all the servants and your servants will all go over before God, to war, like your master commands. Verse 28, and Moshe commanded Eliezer the priest and Yeshua ben Nun, and the heads of the families, Vamates and the tribes of Bnei Yisrael. Now she says, Vayitzav lohem means alehem, over them. Lohem, the lamed of lohem tells lohem means above them, about them. And you find that also yilochem lochem, for you. God, he said to them as follows: if the sons of God and Reuben, Itchem Asiyad, no go over you the Jordan, all those that are capable of fighting war, and the land will be conquered before you. Then you should give them this land of Gilad as an inheritance. But if they don't go out to war with you, then the inheritance should be in the land of Canaan. And Bnei Gad and Reuven in front of the entire congregation said, whatever God has spoken, that's what we'll do. We're going to go out to war with you. And it's Canaan, to the land of Canaan. But we want our inheritance should be across the Jordan. She says, meaning the estates of our inheritance in this side will already be in our hands and our possession, retroactively. Gave to the tribe of Gad and the tribe of Reuben, and then he added, he added also half of the tribe of Menashe. As Melecha Silcha Melech HaMeiri gave him the entire inheritance of Silcha Melech HaMeiri, was Melech Og Melech HaBashan, and the kingship of Og Melech HaBashan. Aretz Lodel Big Vulei, so Aretz is five kings, a lot of land. The borders and the cities surrounding territories. By Yivnu b'nei God is Divin v'Ataras as Arar, and the descendants of God built Divan, Atarat and Arar, v'Ataras Shafin. They also built Ataras Shafin v'Yazer and Yazir and v'Yagba, b'nei Nimra, v'bnei Haran, and they built also Beit Nimra and Beit Haran. Ari Mifsur Gedestain, there were fortified cities and sheepholders. Rashi said, this is a conclusion of the verse, refers to the beginning of the sentence. The descendants of God built these cities to be fortified cities and sheepfolds. Bnei Reuven banos Cheshbon, and the descendants of Reuven built the Cheshbon, Ves Elala, Ves Yikil Yosai, Ves Nevoi, Ves Balmoin, and Nevoi and Balmoin, Ves Abash, Mesubah Shem, the name is changed. Ves Shivna, and Shivna, Vayikli, Ves Shem, Ves Adam, and they changed their names to the cities they built. Now she says Nebai and Balmaim were names was idols. The Amorites have named their cities after idols. So the descendants of Reuben changed their names to other names. And that's what's meant. Mesubah Shem, Noib, and Balmaim changed to other names. Shivna, now she says they built Shivma, the same as Shivam, mentioned above. And the descendants of Macha, the son of Menashe, went Gilad. They went to Gilad. Vayilkada, and they conquered Gilad. Vayerish Asamedi, and they drove out the Medes. Shabbat that was in the city of Gilad. Asher Vayerish, uncle is translated with Sarech. They drove out, and the word Reish is used in two different ways. In the word Yerusha, inheritance, and in the sense Hayrasha, disposition, chasing away, moving people from their land. Moshe gave Gilad to Macha, the son of Menashe, and they settled in it. And then Yorib, the son of Menashe, went all over Yelkelis to Chaviseim. He conquered their villages. He called them the villages of Yor. Rashi confirmed the villages. Since he had no children, he named them after himself in order to perpetuate his name, as villages are like offsprings of cities. And Neivach went and he conquered Kanas, and its surrounding villages. He called it Neivach in his name. Now she says, does not have a mapik. It's a sort of work of Moshe Dash, and since the name did not persist, the counter name written in a weakening form, Allah. Allowing expounded the word loy, not. However, I wonder how it expounded two similar words, Vayikra law bayaz and livneis law bias. You find that it's not so true, that the law makes it a weaker name. We find that that's not so clear, the word law. Chapter 33, verse number 1. Eila mas v'nei Yisrael. We're going to the next parsha. Eila mas v'nei Yisrael. These are the journeys of the Jewish people. Hashayatzum and Mitzrayim, that went out of Mitzrayim, L'tzevaisam, on their troops, on their legions, B'yad Moshe v'Aaron, in the leadership of Moshe and Aaron. Rashi says, why are all these stations recorded? Why do we need to go back to the 42 stations of the Jewish people's journey? In order to make aware of the kindness of God. Namely, that although he decreed upon the Jews that move around and wander in the desert, you should not say that they were wandering and being pushed from place to place entire 40 years. It sounds like they were wandering in the desert. There were no wandering in the desert, as Rashi will show. There were majority in one place. But there was no more than 42 stations stated here. You have to take 14 in which they were the first year, leaving Mitzrayim. They traveled 14 different destinations. leaving Egypt before the decree, meaning before they traveled from Ramses from the tribe from Ramses until they arrived in Ritma, from where the spies were sent, as it says there, after the people departed from Chatzeris and camped in Paran desert, which is where God said to Moshe, send out men. And here it says they journeyed from Chatzeris and camped in Ritma. You thus learned that in the Paran desert, that it was in the Paran desert. Furthermore, deduct the 8 journeys that was after Aaron's death from Mount Har until the plains of Moab in the 40th year. It follows that the entire 38 years, they made only 20 journeys. This explanation is from the works of Moshe Darshan. Tanchuna gave another explanation. This list of stations can be compared to a king whose son was sick, and he took him in a faraway place to cure him. When they returned, the father began recounting all their stations. And they said, here we slept, here were cold, you were cold, here you had a headache. And so too God, in essence, at the end of the journey, tells the Yidden all their journeys that the Eibishter did with them throughout the land, throughout this journey. Moshe Rabbeinu recorded their starting point of their journey. The Maseim, according to the word Alpi Hashem, the starting and the of the journeys Alpi Hashem in the mouth of God. And these are the journeys with their starting points. They journey for Ramses, the first month. The 15th day of the month. If they brought the Korban Pesach the night before. Yotzim Yisrael, the Jewish people went out, B'yad Rama, with an outstretched hand, in front of the eyes of all the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were busy burying those who God had struck down. In their gods, God destroyed the deities. Rashi says they were preoccupied in mourning because they all lost their first sons. And the Jewish people traveled from Sukkot. They camped in Sukkot. And then they traveled from Sukkot and they encamped in Esam, which is at the end of the desert. They traveled from Esam. They traveled to the mouth of the mountains, these 2 mountains, which is facing the Baal Tzvain. They encamped before Migdal. That's where they journeyed from Piachiris. They went into the water, Midbar in the desert, and they went through the desert and they camped in Mara. And then they went from Mara. They came to Elim, and they found in Elim they found the 12 springs of water, and 70 palm trees. And they encamped there. Then they journeyed from Elim and they came back to the Sea of Reeds. Then they went from the Sea of Reeds, they camped in the desert of Sin. And then they traveled from the Midbar Sin, and they camped in Dofka. Then they went from Dofka, they traveled from Olosh, and they traveled, they went to Refidim. And over there was no water. And then they went from his feet and they camped in the desert of Sinai where they received the Torah. And then they went from Midbar Sin in the Kirvas Hataiva, and they traveled from Kirvas Hataiva and they camped in Chatzeris. And they went from Chatzeris and they tried to Nisma. Now she says all these names, you should know, all these names are what happened in that places. There was no names in the desert. Hashem Lashon Hara, this is named after the spy slander. This is Risma, what happened with the spies. So this, what can we, deceitful tongue, give you benefit to you? Risma, only sharpen arrows of mighty that coast the coals of brooms. Vayisum Risma, they traveled for Yisrael Yachadim in Peretz. Vayisum in Peretz, they went from him in Peretz, Vayachtim L'Levena. Vayisum L'Levena, they traveled from L'Levena, Vayachim, they encamped in Nisa. They traveled from Nisa v'yachnu b'Keilasa. They camped in Keilasa. V'yisam b'Keilasa. They traveled from Keilasa v'yachnu b'Har Shofer. V'yifnu b'Har Shofer v'yachnu b'Charada. They went from Har Shofer and they camped in Charada. V'yisam b'Charada and they went from Charada v'yachnu b'Makelis. They camped in Makelis. V'yisam Makelis They went from Makela v'yachnu b'sachas. Yisum b'sachas v'yachnu b'sarach. V'yisum b'tarach, they went from Tarach, v'yachnu b'miska, they went to Miska. V'yisum Miska, and they traveled from Miska. V'yachnu b'chashmeina, and they camped in Chashmeina. V'yisum b'chashmeina, they went from Chashmeina, v'yachnu b'Mercedes, they camped in Mercedes. V'yim Mercedes, they went from Mercedes. V'yachnu b'Bnei HaYaakov, they camped in Bnei HaYaakov. V'yisum Bnei HaYaakov, they traveled from Bnei HaYaakov, v'yachnu b'Chayil HaGidgod, they camped in Chayil HaGidgod. V'yisum b'Chayil HaGidgod, they traveled from Chayil HaGidgod. V'yachnu b'Yatvasim, they camped in Yatvasim. Yisum Yatvasim, they went from Yatvasim, v'yachnu b'Aravena, they camped in Aravena. V'yisum b'Aravena, they went from Aravena, v'yachnu b'Etzin Gavir, they camped in Etzin Gavir. Yisum Etzin Gavir, then they went from Etzin Gavir, v'yachnu b'Notzin, and now they camped in Midbatzin, He Kadesh, which is Kadesh. Yisum Kadesh, they went from Kadesh, v'yachnu b'Heir Har, and they camped in the mountain of mountains. We could say Eretz Edom. This is now at the edge of the country of Edom. And Aaron went up to the. So now we're holding the 40th year. Aaron went up to the mountain. Pi Hashem on the mouth of God. Aaron. And Aaron died there. B'shnas habayim. Let's say it's on the 40th year. The Jewish people in the Mitzrayim. Aaron. We know when Aaron died. The month of Av, this Shabbos is Aaron HaKohen's Yortzeit, the first day of the month of Av. That's the day he passed away, and that's why we usually read this Parsha on the Shabbos of his Yortzeit, and the Chodesh of. Al Pi Havaya Melamed Shemes Min Shika. This teaches us that he died with the kiss of God. Aaron ben Shloisha v'Esrim Shana. Aaron was 123 years. The Mois, when he passed away in the Hoira Har, because Moshe Rabbeinu was 120 years, so Aaron was 123. Yishmakani Melech Arad, so the Canaan king of Arad heard. Yeshu ben Negev, he was in the south of Canaan. Be'eretz Canaan, but he saw when he heard the Jewish people were coming. So we know the story already. The Lamdach that teaches us that how severe the death of Aaron was. That hearing of it, along with the clouds of glory, had been removed, caused the Canaanites to imagine that the permission was now given to attack Israel. And therefore, it's mentioned in the story, it mentions it again, what affected the death of Aaron. They traveled from the Har, they camped on Tzalmena. They traveled on Tzalmena, they camped in Punon. They journeyed from Punon, they camped in Ovis. They journeyed from Ovis and they camped in the ruins of passes. In the borders of Moav. And Rashi says, is a term donating ruins, heaps of stones. Leah Soda. They journeyed from the ruins and they camped in Divan God. They traveled for Divan God. They camped in Alman Divisema. They traveled from Alman Divisema. And they camped in the mountains of passes before Nevoi. They ultimately traveled from the mountains of passes. They camped at the plains of Moav, at the Jordan River, which is opposite Jericho. They camped along the Jordan, from Beit Yishimis ad Oval Hashitin, from Beit Yishimis to Oval Hashitin, Ba'aris Moav, in the plains of Moav. Rashi says from here, he teaches us that the area of the Jewish people now is 12 mil. Oval Shittim, the plains of Shittim is called Ovel. And that completes the Chumash for today. We now go to the Tanya today. We're holding in the middle of the 10th chapter of Tanya today. Alter Rebbe spoke about Torah and Tefillah, two avodas of a Yid in Tshuva Ilah, in the higher level of Tshuva. That ultimately comes to the highest level of Ahavta Hashem Elokecha, that he loves the Eibishter b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, with all his heart and with all his soul, because he does it all for the sake of heaven. He wants the connection between him and God. So since prayer is an expression of tshuva, the higher level of return, therefore you need to have the preparation. And that is tshuva tata. You need the contrite heart. You need this. You need the contrite heart. That's tshuva tata. Feeling the pain and the guilt and whatever a person feels when he does a sin. And that's why our sages say in the Mishnah, you're not allowed to embark to daven, to worship, only through the earnest frame of the mind. Kovid Rashi, one means a kovid reish. Kovid means the heaviness of the head, and it means hachna, humility. That I need to humble myself. A Jew needs to humble us. I need to humble myself before I go to daven. That I go to daven, I go to pray with humility. I have humility. And that's the level of tshuva, humility. That I bend my head. I am humbled, as I said before, and then in the beginning of this whole chapters, the Alter Rebbe says the two levels, the rachmanis and the mercy upon your soul and the contrite heart. That's all tshuva tata, and you need to do that to be able to reach up to the higher level, to feel the uniqueness of my relationship with God, and that's really what the problem is. I first need to humble myself. I first need to have some humility. That's the level of tshuva tata, the lower level of tshuva, which I mentioned before in chapter 7, chapter 8, is to create, to arouse a compassion, first of all, on oneself. And this infers from the state we know that the Gemara says that we learn the whole concept of davening, of prayer. We learn from Chana, the story of Chana, the famous Chana, who the first Chana in Tanakh, which is the story of this woman who was childless, and she comes to the Beis Hamikdash, and she's crying out. She cried, "V'yimaras nefesh." She was bitter of spirit, so she had menidas and nefesh. That's the word maras, mar. She was bitter. That's the way. So the Gemara learns that you have to have menidas. You have to have some bitterness. You have to have some sadness. You have to have humility. So there's a lot of ways of interpreting this. So in the simple ways, you have to have bitterness. And therefore, we cannot do miridus over there. The Alter Rebbe is going to say it doesn't mean. The Rebbe translates miridus as humbleness, not bitterness. Why? Because we learned in the Gemara where it talks about the whole concept of prayer. The Gemara says, Tanan Rabbanan, the rabbis learned, that you don't go to embark on davening, but out of joy. So, and thus, while the individual is to begin the preparation for prayer to achieve by state of bitterness, he expected actually to pray in a state of joy. So you have to, that's what it means. It doesn't mean bitterness, sadness, and depression. It means the concept of humbleness. Our bereaved generation. However, when not all are capable of turning their hearts instantly from one extreme from humility to joy. So therefore, it's very hard to do that in the same time. How do we go from bitterness to joy in that moment? Therefore, the best thing is to do your bitterness, if you got to do bitterness, in earlier. As the Alter Rebbe wrote, midnight. This is especially appropriate time for spiritual stock taking that leads to humility of a broken, contrite heart, and noted above. And the person who cannot do this every night to get up midnight, he should do it once a week. Before Shabbos, that's how it was known that Thursday night, it was Thursday night. Leil Shishi. Leil Shishi, people stayed up a whole night. Leil Shishi. And they would learn Torah the whole night. It's the custom in yeshivas. Leil Shishi. That they wouldn't go to sleep. They would stay up and learn the whole night. Lefnei Yom HaShabbos. Shabbos is law. Why? Because Shabbos is law. Shabbos is not the time for tachna, not the time for contriteness, it's a time for total connection to God, law. So therefore, the best thing is to do it Thursday night. And you're ready to go into Shabbos with a total law, a total higher level of connection. For Shabbos, he also studies the word Shabbos. Indeed, the very letters of the word Shabbos spells the word Tashuv Enesh. In the phrase, you cause man to return. Shabbos means to return. Tashuv Enesh. Shabbos. Shabbos is a Kedar, because Shabbos itself in Kabbalah and Chassidus is the ascending of the worlds to the source. This too is a time to ascend the soul to its source. It's the best time on Shabbos, which constitutes the acts of tshuva. So that's why the Shabbos is tshuva law. The best time to do tshuva law is Shabbos, because that's the whole concept of Shabbos. The whole concept of Shabbos is tshuva law. Frat, tefillah Shabbos, especially the prayer of Shabbos. B'dayla maven, even more than a weekday prayer. So it suffices to those that comprehend. Now the parentheses, the Alter Rebbe says, here the Alter Rebbe officially ended the chapter, but he puts a parentheses over here and he says, you'll understand the phrase, return to me for I redeemed you. What is the meaning? Pirush. For since in the preceding phrase, I have erased your sins like a thick cloud, which is, what means I erased the sins? I erased the cloud. We said through your tshuva, I took away the covering. Ugal ticha, that's why I've redeemed you from the evil, the outer forces. Forces through the arousal of the supreme compassion. That happened through the breakage of Klippa. And we explain, how do you break Klippa? It's through tshuva tata. So through the tshuva tata, one breaks the Klippa. And once one breaks the Klippa, then shuva elai, then you can come to the higher level of tshuva, because you have broken the Klippa. And once you have broken the Klippa, you can come to the higher level of tshuva. Come to the level of tshuva ilah. Azai shuva elai, then you can return to me with shuva ilah, with a higher level of tshuva. And that completes the Tanya of the day, my dear friends. Today is the 27th day of the month, which is the 15th Shir Amalis, chapter 120 to chapter 135, 34, I mean. Say those 15 chapters, you do the Chitas of the day. It's a beautiful Yom Yom today. The Rebbe writes the day today. The Rebbe writes on the 27th day of Tammuz, a brilliant and renowned scholar, exceptionally gifted and remarkable for profound in his studies, came to Liyazna, threw himself into the study of Chassidus. With his powerful intellectual capabilities, he amassed within a short time a great and broad knowledge of Chassidus. This guy was a genius. In his first Yechidus with the Alter Rebbe, he said to the Rebbe, Rebbe, what can I do now? What do I lack? The Rebbe replies, you know what? The Alter Rebbe said, you lack nothing. For you are God-fearing, you're a scholar. However, you need, however, to rid yourself of the chametz, your ego, which is the awareness of self and arrogance, and to bring in matzah, which is bittul, humility, renunciation of self, and implement such as roasting pit may have been used with yeshet, awareness of self. The person imagines himself to be a light. Such pride repels the Shekhinah. the presence of God. And God cannot dwell together with a person who has ego. That implement or vessel person needs purging through such intense white heat that the sparks of Berudim fly out and are absorbed in true light. You have to put yourself through the fire. That's achra. You have to put yourself to the fire until you start to spark. You're taka grace of Talmud Chacham. You know everything, but you have a little bit too much ego, and you gotta break your ego. Have a wonderful and beautiful and wonderful day. We'll see you, Mitchemul, tomorrow. We'll continue to learn together.
Going out to light